My soul cries tears that fall like rain. I am addicted and can't abstain. It is as if my life was in vain, drained of everything but my pain. Fearing the heart, fate will impact. My soul cries tears. So much loss for so little gain. My inner demons won't be slain, and anxiety don't depart. When the eye wears off, there is start. And as I shot drugs in my vein, my soul cries tears. An excerpt from A Match in the Dark by Emile Pinet.
Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to the review of A Match in the Dark by Emile J. Pinet. This is another poetry book that I find very absorbing. I find it quite evocative, it is spiritual, and it is extremely philosophical in my own perception. The book seemed to me like a sort of a writing from a man who has experienced different sort of life event, who has passed through different life horrific event. It seemed to me like a sort of a writing from a man who has an acute sense of observing its environment. It seemed to me like a sort of a writing from a man who is very knowledgeable about the happenings in his society. It seemed to me like a sort of a writing from a man who is very vast into the issue of humanity, who is very vast about love, who have seen life in a different pedestal, in a different level. And while I read through this book, it's a collection of a lot of poems that had me thinking, and it challenges my perception about life. It had me questioning about the meaning of life itself. Because while I read through most of the poem in this collection, it is very philosophical. It is absolutely evocative. The book is one of those fantastic poetry books that I've read in time past. You know, like I always say, I am a lover of poem. I love reading poems so much just as a poet. And I love poems that are able to pull me in as a reader. I love poems that are extremely philosophical. I love reading poems that it will leave me with questions about the human side. I love reading poems that will leave me with questions about the authenticity of the human being, of the human nature, of the human art. And one of the things I can say about this book is that it does not only expound on some certain aspect, it is very deep, it is vast into discussion that contains different titles, into topics and subjects that are absolutely centered on the human side. You know, it is humanistic, it is evocative, it is spiritual, and it's actually a philosophical read. My review of this book is actually going to be a spoiler free. I just want to give a short video book recommendation for you to have an idea of what Emile J. Pinet has had to communicate in his fantastic book, A Match in the Dark. So before I proceed in my short review of this poetry book, I'd love to read to you about the author. Emile was born in a small city, New Brunswick, Canada, the third eldest of 13 children, 10 girls and 3 boys. He is a product of a semi-dysfunctional family, brought up by a physically abusive and controlling father versus a loving, nurturing mother. Many of his poems reflect the uniqueness of nature, which he loves, and its poetic observation of life in general. He has been writing poems since he was about 35. They just started to come to him one day at work, and he decided to write them down and express himself through poetry. And that's one thing I see about this book, A March in the Dark. Like I said earlier on, to me, the book seemed to be sort of a writing from a man who has experienced different sort of life event. It seems to me as a sort of a writing from an elderly man, from an old man, from an aged man who has lived a lot of years and has had a perfect understanding of most life issues. And when I read through it, I found knowledge in it. I found ethics in it. I found morals in it. I found questions in it. I found a lot of philosophical ideas, many of which left me in a state of muse, many of which leave me feeling contemplative, many of which leave me feeling introspective. And I was like, wow, this is a sort of a fantastic book, one of the best that I've ever read. So I would also love to read to you a sort of an inscription at the back page of the book. Emile is a man of principle with conscience and heart, and that often leads to internal conflict with questions of morality and blind faith, which he tends to address within his poetry. Truth displayed openly for the perusal of the world. Doors left ajar, windows edged open, closet explored, and the soul poured forth so that pain spills freely. All this and more await the reader as your poetic journey begins in A March in the Dark. This book is a collection of wide range of numerous poems encapsulated in it. It is actually made up of two parts. The first part is a collection of poems from the author, and the other part is a sort of a collection of poems from the author's friend. And all of these, most of the writing here are very evocative to me. They are full of questions. They are full of words that will leave you thinking about the meaning of life. They are full of words that will keep you thinking and searching for meaning as you read through it. And I'd love to say that I love Emile J's Pinet knowledge. I love his knowledge. I love his adeptness. I love his acuteness when it comes to writing poems. Some poems are extremely sad. Some express painful event. Some talk about death and grief. Some talk about asylum seekers when it comes to seeking refuge. Some talk about politics, extending from politics in the United States and that of Canada. Some also touches on the theme of environmental conservation, which I find very amazing. And a lot of poems touching about biblical themes, talking about the humanity, talking about love, talking about conscience, and many other themes encapsulated in this book. Starting from his moves about environmental situation, or starting from his poem that seek to talk about the theme of environmental preservation and conservation of the natural resources. I love to say that I love his particular poem with his collection that talk about the wildfire in Amazon. There's a way the author wrote this poem. He wrote it in a way that I feel it's so nice. The lines, the stanza, asks a sort of an extensive interpretation conveying in each line. It talk about the causes of the Amazon fire. It talk about how it influenced the environment and how it's gonna have a sort of a bad consequences on the environment, talking about the depletion of the oxygen layer and several other things encapsulated in it. You also talk about the extinction of animals that definitely followed the Amazon fire and the sort of effect that goes after it, talking about deforestation and its impact on the ozone layer. I'd love to say that I extremely love its take on this Amazon rainforest description. And again, he also made reference to its impact on the sea, talking about the effect it's going to have on aquatic animals like fishes, etc. And from reading this book, Emile J. Pinet seemed to me as a fantastic environmentalist. The Amazon fire is not the only thing that I talk about when it comes to the preservation of the environment. It talk about several other themes, talking about the ozone layer, it talk about global warming, it talk about deforestation and several other themes. It seemed to me like someone who has a keen idea, who has a vast idea, who has an acute sense of observing its environment and bringing out something impressive from it. I also love his take on death. From the book, it actually indicated that the author lost his mother, and I'm not sure if this exploration towards writing about the theme of death, because I'd love to say that his talk or his moves, his philosophical idea about death in this book is so vast, and thinking about the meaning of life in entirety, it had me repenting, and it had me having a sort of a muse, a deep thought about our essence here on earth. It had me feeling quite remorseful, and I was like, this is so sad. And again, he also has some theme that talk about depression, that talk about pain, that talk about love and betrayal, and several other themes encapsulated in it. In the book, I'd love to say that I was fascinated by a particular poem titled "They Stole a Child." This poem is very deep. It is absolutely painful, and it's actually a story of a mother whose child has been snatched away. This part is full of emotion, and it had me resonating on the poems of Kohame. As a poet, I also love the author's take and idea on the poem titled "A Poet's Word." Here, he made a sort of a deep insight, interpretation, and extensive outlook into what bring about poems, how poets come up with their poems, what inspires poem, the interpretation of poem. And as a poet, I find this part very, very alluring. It's one of my best parts. I love it so much because it's as if the author has a sort of a keen idea to look into the art of every poet and season out the course of their words. Also, from the poem titled "Kindness and Tears," this part had me thinking on the current Russian and Ukrainian war, because it actually has a theme of war and it is very deep. It had me thinking about this ongoing Ukrainian and Russian war and its sort of impact on the people that reside in the war zone in Ukraine. Some poems in this book are in form of narration. The act of telling a story through poem, it's actually called a narrative poetry. And one of the parts that intrigues me most in this book is the one titled "Angels Dance." This part is actually very deep. It's like a story of how a young boy lost his mother and the aftermath of the effect on him, the emotional aftermath, the psychological aftermath, and the effect of someone living without a mother. And I admire the sort of in-depth question they were raised in the poem titled "Who is First to Go?" This poem seemed to me as a sort of a letter or write-up from a dear lover asking nature, or probably asking God, to know who is first to go, if he is the one or the partner. So this part is like, who is first to go, the husband or the wife? And there's a way Emile J writes this poem. He wrote it in a way whereby I would love to equate the narrator of this particular poem as the writer of the poem, because the poem is very directive. It's like asking question about who is first to go, what would be the aftermath of anyone who left the other behind. And this part is just so profound that it had me thinking quite deeply. I praise all the poems encapsulated in this book, many of which add or obey some literary features, which I think added more awesome descriptive quality to the book. When I'm talking about poetic feature, I'm talking about the use of free verses, the use of ballad, sonnet, assonance, alliteration, lyrics, rhyme, meter, rhythm, limerick, acrostic, yato, prose poetry, sonnet, and many more like that. I'd love to say that most of the poem here that expound on death had me thinking about the inevitability of death itself. Reading through the book, I had me thinking about the meaning of life. It had me asking some difficult questions that I found very contemplative. And I love to say that the book thoroughly expounds on different themes. I'm very sure that if you're a poetry lover, if you're someone who loves poem very well, you're gonna find absolute joy and pleasure reading through A March in the Dark. From the other section, which is a sort of a collection of poems from the author's poet friends, they also contain deep, insightful topics and themes that had me quite engulfed. I'm very sure that you're gonna find absolute pleasure in A March in the Dark. But before I give a kind of a recap of my review, I'd love to read to you some poems that I love in the book. I'm just gonna be reciting a couple poems that I find quite lovely in the book. So I'm gonna be reading a particular poem titled "Something Bigger Than Myself" from page 94. I'm not reading all the poem, I underlined some parts that I'm gonna read out. So it goes thus. I am not in control of anything. All aspects of my life are guided by an unknown force. a series of circumstances that ultimately define my identity. I am not alone. Someone or something unseen is sponsoring my journey through life. Is it destiny? Is it fate? Is it God? And this is one of those questions that I myself, as a philosophical writer, have loved to raise. I've loved to raise questions about the whys that we are here, the reasons that we are here. Who is in control of our life? Is it God, or is it fate, or is it some mere forces that we have no idea on? And from here, from what Emily wrote here, it's like he's talking, he's trying to ask, trying to know who is the cause of this nature force, who controls everything. And that's why I love the title, as being told here, something bigger than myself. It's a sort of an obscure contemplation. It's a sort of an unknown questions by someone who seek to get answer. And asking from here, is it destiny? Is it fate? Is it God? Also, I'll be reading a poem from page 171. It's titled The Follies of Man. Like I said, I won't be reading everything, just a part that I underline, the first four, stanzas. Beware of Satan, he is a cunning trickster, well versed in the heart of deceit. But alas, these words fall onto deaf ears, for sin's addiction is tough to defeat. Blind to the truth, some believe there is no light, and thus are lost to the dark forever. Admiring their image in the mirror, they view themselves as learned and clever. The game goes on. Meanwhile, the devil smiles with contentment at the follies of man, and navigating the dark corridors of your mind, evil plot its master plan. When you recognize what is happening, you look to God for a different path. But prayers are laced with melancholy thoughts. For beseeching mercy, your fear is wrought. Honestly, there are a lot of meaning, extensive interpretation to the lines and stanzas contained in the poem. There are a lot of recitation that I would have loved to make in the book, but I just want to make this review spoiler free. But I would love to say that when I read through the book, it had me emotional. It had me feeling humble. It had me questioning the essence of life itself. And I so much love Emile J. Pinet's writer. I love reading books that will be able to question your inner mind. Leave you with question, leave you with mulling, leave you with question that you have to keep thinking long after you've read it. I don't want to talk about this book in entirety. I just want to give you a short video book recommendation of what is contained in Emile J. Pinet's A March in the Dark. If you'd like to get a copy of this book, I left a link in the description part of this video for you to get a copy directly on Amazon. If you watched this video to the next point and you're yet to click on the subscribe button, I want to urge you to please click on the subscribe button over there. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you can get notified anytime I release new videos. Thank you very much for watching my video book review of A March in the Dark by Emile J. Pinet. It's a fantastic book. It's a sort of a literary poetry book, and I've found absolute joy in Emile J. Pinet's write-up. I look forward to seeing what it comes up next week, and I'm recommending this book to lovers of poetry and literature at large. Thank you very much. See you in my next video. Goodbye.